This is a long-term thing. You can't suddenly switch advocacy on and suddenly everybody's getting, thousands of likes and, tens of thousands of followers. It takes time to build up credibility and an audience.
Hello and welcome to Masters of Comms, the podcast for transformative communication techniques straight from the pros. In the next episode, our guest will share his recommendations on how to scale an employee advocacy program to a global workforce. I'm Lamar Williams, host of Masters of Comms, as well as head of partnerships at Sociable. And today I'm accompanied by our guest from Capgemini, Joe Morris, head of social media and employee advocacy. Hello, Joe, and welcome to Masters of Comms.
Hi, Lamar, and thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Great to have you as well. Joe, would you mind taking just a minute to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure, yeah. So, hello, I'm Joe Morris. As you said, I'm head of social media and employee advocacy at Capgemini. I have actually been at Capgemini for I just passed my 25-year anniversary, which is astonishing and makes me feel ancient. I've been working in content and media and storytelling and digital in different forms pretty much from day one at Capgemini. And I'm from London, but I'm based in Atlanta.
Fantastic. And tell us a little bit about Capgemini. What does Capgemini do exactly?
That's a good question. Capgemini is a leading digital transformation. So we're a very big technology services consulting company headquartered in France. Today we have about 365,000 employees with clients all over the globe.
So Joe, let's jump right in. What I was thinking about is in these changing economic times, we're seeing a shift in corporate dynamics to adopt new media formats in order to attract a variety of audiences. And with traditional company landing pages and websites diminishing online traffic, many corporations have turned to employee advocacy. Maybe you could describe why it was important for Capgemini to invest in an EA program.
Well, I would say it's not really down to changing economic times. Of course, economics play into it in terms of budgets and people's willingness to spend on certain things. But really, latterly at least, it's driven more by changes in technology and changes in, I would say, user wants and needs and expectations. As you said, the kind of traditional channels, digital channels, their impact is diminishing. Corporate, organic, social still plays a very important role, but that role, I think, is changing significantly. I think we are moving from social media started off as a social form of communication, right? It's about connecting people. And then as enterprises started getting on board, it became more about, at least from an enterprise perspective, broadcast. So broadcast channel, sending out links, driving traffic, downloads, leads, etc. Which is all fine, but I think now the platforms themselves, and especially for us, a B2B company, LinkedIn is a super important impact that we can have with those corporate organic pages, company pages, is diminishing. The algorithm is actively against us to some extent today. So we are not able to make the same impact. At the same time, I hear it like almost every day now, but people want to buy from people, and so it's getting back to that social connection. So for us, employee advocacy is a way of driving intimacy really with our target audience, taking advantage of our employees' networks, their personal connections to inform people about the topics that are important to Capgemini and topics that are important to our audiences, and where we think things are going. So that's why we're shifting away from, or at least shifting priorities from sort of corporate organic to advocacy, because it is, again, it's about reaching people and making a real impact one-to-one.
And based off of your investment in your program, you were just talking about investment. So can you address whether this has had an effect on your paid organic communications?
Well, as I said, priorities are shifting in terms of investment in organic, time and resource, right? That we are slowly shifting advocacy from appearing to be just another channel to actually the best way that we can go to market, the best use of social media that we can make. So the investment is beginning to shift, and that's a slow process. In terms of paid, I think again it's shifting, but but in the opposite direction. So I think as we kind of stop relying quite so heavily on corporate organic, then corporate paid needs to take a front role. And I think it's really important that paid and advocacy work very closely together. So yeah, things are shifting for sure.
Glad to hear that. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was possibly providing us with some of your initial goals or objectives that you put in place for your EA program. How did they evolve over time as you scaled to even more employees? Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I should say is that I was responsible for initiating the program, so I want to make sure that I'm not taking credit for that. I think, back in 2013, I think it was 2013 when it was launched, that was a pretty forward-thinking thing to do. It was not common for people to be building a formal employee advocacy program at that time. But at the time, it was mostly focused on amplification. And so creating an army of people, subject matter experts that can amplify our key messages. And while there was kind of a desire to kind of enable people to use social media well, right, and build their presence and network, ultimately the emphasis was on amplification, and that's partly down to circumstances and investment and so on. So that was kind of the initial thing, and then it became about, okay, how do we scale that? So how do we add more and more and more? Which is fine, but it gets very hard to manage, particularly if you're not investing in the number of people that you have to actually manage those people. So 2 years ago, we shifted focus. So today, it's more about influence. As I said, it's about relationships. It's about enabling our core subject matter experts to strengthen their networks, to build an audience on social, to drive conversations, influence decisions. So really, it's, in some ways, it's a subtle shift. It means we're not just measuring number of times a particular piece of content got shared, how many impressions did it get. It's much more important and actually much harder, is measuring who did you influence, who liked your post, who actually left a comment. So it's less about quantity and more about quality.
Yes, I would completely agree with that. And in a company that has such a large footprint where language, culture, or even diversity may have an impact on the implementation of a program, how do you construct a scalable program for a global workforce? How do you overcome those challenges? Maybe were there some particular drawbacks there?
You construct a scalable program with an awful lot of blood, sweat, and tears. 365,000 employees, that's a lot of people. And you can't, I think the key thing is to not treat them as one big amorphous block. You need to segment your employees just the same way that you should segment your audience. Because of course, not everybody has the same role, not everybody has the same expertise, seniority, etc. So the way that we are tackling it, because this is very much an ongoing process, is by segmenting. So focusing on senior leadership, on subject matter experts, and then further things like people working in the talent area, for instance, sales. And so just going through different topics, different communities, so breaking it down that way. So it really is about focus your efforts basically on where you're going to get the biggest return.
Got it. And, once you've decided to implement this program, how did you communicate the importance of your program to your employees so they've understood the benefits of participating throughout your global offices? And once you've done that, how did you identify, engage, or encourage employees to participate in the program? Were there any specific criteria that you used?
Communicating the importance of the program is super, super important. And to be perfectly honest, when we launched the new version of the program 2 years ago, it's something that we didn't invest enough in. And this is something we sort of came to realize after sort of 12 months or so, is that's one thing that we didn't really do is communicate why. And I think we sort of took it for granted a little bit. Why is this good for the business, but also why is this good for you? Why is it good for you to be active on LinkedIn, for instance? What can that actually do for you? What kind of benefits does it bring you? Why is it important to be a digital leader today? Yeah, that's something that we didn't do enough of. And also actually just internally as well, it's, to kind of like our marketing community, for instance, why this should be a core part of how you go to market now, the key feature of your campaigns. We didn't do enough of that, I think. And, it's the kind of thing you kind of really realize by doing, but also I think it's a sign the relative sophistication of our new approach to advocacy. Our goals are, they're quite ambitious in terms of being able to change perceptions. And so we sort of underestimated or didn't appreciate how much of a kind of behavioral change program this is, the willingness to share, to be open, and step out of the shadow of the branded account, right, and put it into the hands of the people. That's can seem like quite a risky thing to do. So this is something that we're sort of working to redress now, actually, by process of building more documentation guidelines so that cover, why is this a good thing for you? We've spent a bit of time to establish, okay, these are the four key values, the four key value adds to you as an individual of participating in the program, for instance. So we have our kind of official narrative around that. And we are investing quite a bit of time in documentation, presentations, and so on, and making sure that those are tailored to different audiences, different seniorities, different roles as well. So it's really important to spend a bit of time doing that.
So you just talked about the guidelines that you've implemented and the four key values that you've added. Maybe you can give us an example of what those key values are, the four, and then also how do you ensure that the content that will be shared or is shared by the employee is on brand and aligned with company values?
So 4 values. One is about being connecting with your audience, being plugged in. This is part of being a digital leader, the importance of obviously leadership, but also the digital component of it. Demonstrate that, you understand how social media works, because this is how an awful lot of the world communicates today. And especially with younger generations, it's super important to be able to demonstrate to them that you get it, right? Not saying that means you have to suddenly start sharing TikToks, but that is really important. But then being plugged into what's going on, plugged into your network, being able to listen to what your audience is saying, what your clients are saying, what influencers are saying, thought leaders, super important. Related to that is just about being informed at a basic level. What are the conversations that are happening around, say, generative AI? For instance, and social media is a great place to read those. So that's again, it's part of listening to your network and understanding what are the trends, what are the hot topics right now. I mentioned digital leadership. Leadership generally is people. Forget the number, but an awful lot of candidates look at is the CEO active, and what kind of things are they saying? And for us, it's perfect forum. With CEO as kind of brand ambassador in chief, that he or she is visible on the platforms, is active, is talking about the things that are important to the business, what our values are, our priorities, where we think the world is going, but also that they are active in the sense of they are engaging with their community. They are part of the community. They're not just it's not just a broadcast channel for them, but they are using it as a way to listen as well as talk. And then, the fourth one really is opportunity. Just on a very personal level, being active on social can bring you attention. People start to understand, see you as a thought leader on a particular topic, as a go-to person to ask questions, whether it's driverless vehicles or machine learning or whatever it is, right? Or social media. And that can bring opportunities. You might get invited onto a podcast like this one and, speaking events.
Great. Those are great key values. And so how do you ensure that the content that is shared by your employees is on brand and aligned with those values and the company's messaging?
By ruling with an iron fist. No, I think the very first step is to ensure that people understand where the guardrails are, that you're doing your employees a disservice if you don't tell them that, if you do this kind of stuff on social media, you're going to get into trouble. So first of all, to make sure everybody's clear on what not to say. So don't give away state secrets. Don't share photos of your access ID for the office. Basic security stuff like that. But then also, don't be irresponsible. Don't be rude. Don't be stupid. Be respectful. Be positive. Be a positive member of your community. And it's all about ultimately being able to use social media safely and securely. We want to give employees the confidence that is it okay to share this? They know whether it is or not, or if they're not sure, what to do. So, we spent a lot of time building a new code of conduct for social media and then training people on it, making sure that people have done the training and that, our key advocates have done the training so that we can feel secure and so can they. So that's really important. And then in terms of sort of content, we give guidelines, training in terms of what's the right mix. If you're sharing content on LinkedIn, in other words, don't share just Capgemini content because nobody's really going to want to read that. And to be honest, you can just get that from the company page if they really want to. Anyway, it's about having a good balanced mix of, personal content because, now LinkedIn is much more, it's not Facebook, thankfully, but it is becoming more and more a forum for people to share personal stories because, to my mind, it makes absolute sense because, what do you do in the office? Do you talk about your weekend, when you're getting a cup of coffee? Do you share important milestones and things like that? Then, if it's appropriate to share with your colleagues in the office, then why not share it with your audience? Because it's a core part of getting to know somebody. And like I said before, we see social is all about relationships, it's all about intimacy, and you're not going to get that. So training on the mix, but then also we have everyone is divided into communities. So communities of practice, if you like, in terms of topics. And each community has a community manager, and they are responsible for sharing content, the branded content and third-party content suggestions for our advocates to share. And so, those community managers are pretty well schooled in what is okay and what is not okay to share, and what does a good post look like and stuff like that. But it's also about educating the advocates themselves directly on what does good look like on LinkedIn, the algorithm, right? What does the algorithm like today? It changes all the time. So we invest in staying on top of that and making sure that our employees understand it as well.
That's great feedback. And from an organization that's had more than 10 years of experience in this area, being that you launched in 2013, maybe you could talk about what strategies did you put in place to ensure your engagement program would last for the long term?
That's a tough question. I think the key thing is being agile, nimble in your approach so that, it's the same thing as the algorithm training, right? It's understanding what works today, and not assuming that that's going to work forever. And being able to, we spend an awful lot of time looking at what is working and what isn't. Why this group of people not responded? Why are they not active? What's gone wrong? How do we need to change? And so, we have a model, but that model is a living, breathing thing. It changes, it evolves, it grows. And I think that's the key thing, really. Because, we could, in terms of the actual people, the individuals, of course, those people are going to change over time, over a 10-year period, right? Some of them are going to leave, some of them are going to change roles. So you can't pin it all on working long-term with those people necessarily. Although obviously that is the ideal. And, one thing super important for people to understand is this is a long-term thing. You can't suddenly switch advocacy on and suddenly everybody's getting, thousands of likes and, tens of thousands of followers. It takes time to build up credibility and an audience. But so it's really about making sure that your model can adjust as the environment you're working in adjusts.
Great information to know. And I think you were talking about metrics just a minute ago. So what metrics did you use to measure the success of your program? And is there any technology that plays a role in the management or measurement of employee participation and the success of this initiative?
Well, that's a great question, and one that we have spent a lot of time considering how to measure. In the old version of the program, it was relatively simple because it was measured on how many people were active, how much content was being shared, how many clicks, that kind of stuff. Simple, very simple metrics. Today, because our ambitions have changed a little bit, so too the metrics need to change, and our understanding of what actually good looks like. In an ideal world, we would be focused on one metric, which is revenue generated, right? Ultimately, that's why we're in business, is to generate revenue. But one, that's not that simple. And two, if that number goes up or down, you need to understand why. And so that requires us to look at lots of other factors as well. while taking into account the fact that it's not that easy to get a holistic picture. And LinkedIn in particular makes life very difficult for everybody. They're so tight with their API. And, I'm sure you guys know that just as well as I do. And how do you measure the success? One thing we ended up with is we have a kind of a tool, a visual aid to help us. Because for us, I mentioned it's long term. For us, it is about a journey. It's about putting our advocates on a journey to kind of influence, which doesn't mean we're expecting everybody to end up with 500,000 followers, but it's really we have built, we call it the maturity grid. It's basically a scatter chart effectively where we're able to plot people's activity and see it over time. And it's about plotting really behaviors. So are they behaving in an influencer-like fashion? So that's looking at things like obviously network size, but then network growth, engagement rates, activity levels. Are they commenting on other people's content, stuff like that? I think we have a pretty good way of understanding what the data is showing us now, but it's tough, I feel like it is a necessary evil to understand, because you can't just start posting and suddenly your network's going to grow. So it's being able to, for those community managers, to give them the tools they need, the insight they need to be able to tell somebody, yes, you're publishing consistently, that's great, but your network's not growing. Why do you think that is? Well, if you look at your activity, that's all you're doing is you're just posting content. You're not engaging with your audience. You're not responding to comments. You're not liking other people's content. You're not commenting on other people's content. So you're not being a good community member. And yes, when you've got scale, people to deal with, you can't expect everyone to just spend, time going through everybody's LinkedIn profile feeds, for instance. So it's about giving them the metrics and be able to show, and I know that our advocates really appreciate this sort of visual aspect to it, so that they can see literally this sort of journey for them and going ideally, up to the top right corner. So that's been really useful. And then, otherwise, of course, it's, how many people are active and understanding why those people aren't active, why have they not logged into the platform recently, why have they not shared any content, that kind of stuff.
Maybe you could talk about what advice you would give other companies out there that are looking to scale their own employee advocacy program to a global level. Or maybe you have 3 key recommendations that you could provide them so that they can implement something today.
I would say the main thing is kind of what I said towards the beginning about segmenting. If you have a sort of scale similar to us or greater, if you talk about rolling out a program for all of them, that's a big mountain to climb. Advocacy is not easy because you are fundamentally dealing with people and emotions. The one thing about advocacy is that for some people, the idea of sharing content on LinkedIn is intimidating, right? That's putting yourself out there, and it doesn't come naturally to some people to say, "Hey, I'm an expert on this topic," and it makes you vulnerable, right? There is a very emotional element to all of this, and then so to try and treat all your employees as one isn't practical or possible. The more that you can segment, and it's one thing we really learned is about really key things about picking the people that you focus on and that you invest in, because somebody can be a great candidate on paper, but that doesn't mean that they're going to do it. And that no end of emails and conference calls and, training sessions or whatever will make them do that. Will make them sacrifice a bit of their time every day to spend on this. They just want. And so it's pick your people carefully, focus on the low-hanging fruit. I'm not sure actually if that's the right expression in this context, but I would start with leaders. Start with leadership, because that for us has been a big thing, is that once you see your leadership is active, then they are highly visible within the company. Of course, that attracts more people to say, that looks good, I think I would do that too. And then after that, it's about, okay, what are your priority areas, and whether that's in particular topics or particular roles. Do you want to focus on sales, social selling? Is it about talent acquisition, and so on? With all of this, it's the community approach, I think, is the one that works best. So you focus on a community of people with a community manager who's there to be a cheerleader for the program, to answer questions, share great content, and get people enthused about it and be able to talk about successes.
Okay, so segment, pick your people, focus on the low-hanging fruit, or start with leadership. And I'll go with community approach. Would you agree with that?
That sounds good to me. Of course, there is content as well. Content is king, of course, but I would say actually people is king, really, in an advocacy conversation. Of course, they have to have good content to share.
Got it. Great. Well, Joe, thank you so much. We've actually arrived at pretty much the end of our podcast, but I have one final question that I enjoy asking all of our guest experts of Masters of Comms. Would you mind sharing with us the title of a book or a film that had a significant impact on you and why?
That's a good question. I think the thing that springs to mind is it's a TV show from the UK from the 80s called The Young Ones. It was a very short-run show. I think that they only had 2 seasons, but something that I watched when I was young, obviously very young in the 80s, and it really did have a big impact on me. In fact, it was a family favorite, and the reason I think anybody who's seen it, especially who saw it back then, would probably understand why. It's anarchic. It's a very anarchic show. It was kind of quite groundbreaking at the time, sort of an alternative to the sort of nicey sitcom. And it just, that kind of anarchy, and I'm not saying I'm an anarchist today by any means, but it was that kind of partly just the humor of it. I'm British, so we love toilet humor, absolutely. But also it was just very off the wall. But it was very liberating, really, the idea that anything could happen. And, they would break the fourth wall, and there was a love of absurdity, things like that. And it's apart from just a source of endless quotes that my family loved to quote on the WhatsApp group today, but also just, that feeling of freedom, I think, it has informed me, and certainly informed my sense of humor.
So the feeling of freedom from the young ones in the 80s, that is great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Joe.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it.
This has been Masters of Comms, the podcast for transformative communication techniques straight from the pros. Follow us here to get the next episode. See you soon.